Hello everyone and good evening. Thank you very much for joining me on this Friday night. If you could just let me know if you can hear me. Let me just write this on. Can you hear me? If someone could say hello or someone could say yes, that would help me greatly. Then I would know if I'm just talking here and for no reason whatsoever. Um, okay, let's get stuck into the work today. So I asked you to have a look at two sentences, and they were both, and of course the topic was about long sentences and the problems with long sentences in legal writing. Now, the two sentences that I gave you were not the longest sentences in the world, but nevertheless, they had their own problems. So I'll take you through the sentences, I'll take you through my suggested answers. If during the process you agree with me or disagree with me, then please write to me on the chat and let me know if you have any questions at all. I'll be more than happy to go through my answers and go through my thinking. And just to let you know, as I'll be going through the presentation, I'll be looking to my left and my right because I've got two screens here. So if I'm looking away, it doesn't mean that I'm not paying attention, just having a look at all of the information that I've got on both screens. Okay, so let's begin with the first sentence. And it was this one here. Retained elements shall mean all elements of any deliverables created for the client to the extent the same are not specific to the business of the client or the specification for the deliverables set forth in the statement of work, including without limitation, organizational elements of a design, and all modifications to the foregoing, and all portions thereof, together with all proprietary rights relating thereto, including without limitation all copyrights, patents, and trade secret rights. Now, this sentence I found on the internet. There are plenty of contracts and legal writings on the internet, and this was one such clause that I took from a contract that I found. How do we deal with this? Well, if we remember the rules, we tried that I laid out in the video for long sentences. We tried to make 1 point per sentence. Another sentence, another point. Or if we're using a sentence with a subordinate clause and the main clause, we would try to make 1 point per clause, a maximum of 2 points per sentence. Now, those are the ideal rules, and those are the rules which we should try to follow as best we can. So let's see if we can do that to this sentence. So, based on the fact that 1.1 sentence, what would be the first sentence? I would suggest that it looks something like this. That retained elements means all elements of any deliverables created for the client. 1 point, 1 sentence. What we've got here is a definition and introducing a definition anyhow. So this is the basic element of the definition. Now, as you can see, I've got rid of shall. This is another lesson, but shall is a word that we should not use in legal writing. The reason why we shouldn't use shall is because it has 4 different meanings. One official meaning in law, but it is accepted as meaning 4 different things. So just for the purposes of this and to reduce word count, I'll make some changes to the writing just to improve the writing a little bit. So my first sentence would be retained elements means all elements of any deliverables created for the client. What about the second sentence? Now, here we have a problem because what we've got is quite unclear language in the original sentence, and we've got to try and translate that as best we can, given the context that we've got, into other language. And the reason why we have to do this is because we're trying to break this long sentence down into smaller sentences. So very often when you're trying to break a sentence down into the points that it's trying to make, one of the things that you have to do is to deal with language and to translate that language or to interpret that language as best you can. And it might sound like quite a simple thing, but it's actually quite a difficult thing to do. And certainly from my experience, when I've broken down long sentences before in the past, you might think that you've got it right, but when I got in contact with the original author, it became clear that I didn't understand it, or I didn't get it right, simply speaking, that the author meant something else. And this wasn't apparent, this wasn't clear based on the writing, based on the choice of words that they chose. And the problem that I've got with here in this sentence is to the extent the same. To the extent the same. What does that mean, to the extent, exactly? This is it's a situation where we're very familiar with the words, we understand what they mean, but it's quite vague when you actually have to think about exactly what it means. So in breaking down this sentence into smaller sentences, I've dealt with it in this way. I've said this definition applies, and I've got this definition because in the second line of the original sentence, it says the same. And the same refers back to retained elements. At least I hope it's retained elements, although this could also arguably be deliverables. This is another problem in English. This is what we call an unclear antecedent, and this is something that we meet in, well, I go into more detail about when I talk about substitution. So we've got a problem here. What does the same mean? Well, I think it means retained elements. So then we have to deal with to the extent retained elements are not specific. So I've dealt with it by saying this definition, the first sentence, this definition applies if retained elements are not specific to the client's business. Here I've made a change in the words. I've got rid of an of the. So in the original it says to the business of the client. So I've changed that to client's business. Or the specification for the deliverables stated in the statement of work. And stated I've changed from set forth. So here we've managed to pinch or save one word by using a more powerful verb rather than using a slightly more complicated language, set forth. So I've made the change, and I think this is what this sentence means, but I'm not 100% sure. And I was thinking about this today, and I was making several changes to the sentence today. This is the happiest that I think I am, but I can't say that I'm 100% sure this is what the original sentence meant. Please, if you think that I've got this wrong, or if you can suggest a better alternative, then please write to me either in the live chat or in the comments below and let me know what you think, because as I said, I'm not 100% sure. The third sentence is in effect the details. So what we've got here is this includes without limitation organizational elements of a design, blah 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 blah. So I've broken down this one long sentence into 3 different sentences. The original sentence, I think, had about 56 words. In the video that I did at the beginning of the week, I talked about readability scores. Readability scores basically is a scientific measurement which tells you how easy it is, to read a sentence or to read a text. And ideally, you want to have a readability score as low as possible. And the reason why you want to have a readability score is because the readability score refers to the readability age of the person that's reading the text. So what does that mean? This means that your readability age is the age at which you can understand certain language. And I know that sounds a little bit wishy-washy or a little bit strange, but I can break it down like this. if you've got a readability age of, let's say, 24, then you have got postgraduate education, let's say, so you have an advanced level or advanced knowledge of English language vocabulary, and you can deal with very complicated words, very complicated sentences, etc., etc. If you have a readability age of 18, it means that you've got higher education. So you can, so in England it would be A levels, in Poland it would be matura, and that means that you're educated to that age where you can understand more complicated text. Not as complicated as postgraduate, but still complicated. If you have a readability age of 16, it means that you have basic education knowledge, which means that you know less words, and so on. And the reason why this is important is because the scientists have said that as a whole, across various different nations, when you produce a text and you want it to be understood, then you've got to make sure that your writing is at a certain readability age. And that readability age is the average for the country that you're, or the language that you're writing for. Now, very often I've asked people, oh, thank you very much for letting me know that you can hear me. Thank you very much. So in the past, I've asked, as I always do in my lessons, I say, what do you think the readability age is of the United Kingdom? So what do you think is the average age of education that everyone will understand what it is that's being written? And the Polish lawyers that I've worked with have always rather generously said 16 or 18 or even older, which means that as an average, everyone in the United Kingdom has the knowledge of understanding English at like a basic education, higher education, or postgraduate. The reality is that the readability age of the United Kingdom, if I remember it correctly, is 9. So that means you've got to, if you're writing something for public consumption, if you're writing something for the public, so if a government is writing a brochure or a government is writing a leaflet to help people either with taxes or with benefits or something like this, then they have to write that in a way that a 9-year-old will understand it. And part of getting the readability age as low as possible to 9 is sentence length. So when you've got a sentence of 56 words, which I think this original sentence is, then the readability age is way off the scale. I mean, it's up there in the 20s. It's a really, really difficult sentence to understand because of the amount of information you're communicating in the sentence. Now, I don't want you to think that lawyers must write in complicated ways. And the reason why why you shouldn't think like that is because lawyers may well be extremely educated, but they're writing for people who, one, may be as educated, but maybe less educated, maybe have less knowledge, and particularly have less knowledge of legal English. So if you were to write a long sentence and it was full of, for example, legalese, if it was full of legal prepositional phrases and so on, then you might be showing off your skills as an English, as someone who can write legal English or who can write English. But the end result is that the person that you're writing to is not going to understand what it is that you're trying to say. And this, my breakdown of the original sentence, is a perfect example of that. At the beginning of the second sentence, as I said, where it says this definition applies if retained elements, I'm not 100% sure that I'm right here. I might be right, it's a good guess, but I'm not 100% sure. So this is the problem with long sentences, and this is why we should aim to keep sentences under the recommended average length of 25 words per sentence. And as you can see here, the average here is 24 words per sentence. So across the document, if I manage to keep it at under 25 words, then I've done a good job in terms of making it as easy as possible to understand. So there's a number of important scientific elements into this, but there's a lot of common sense as well. Simply speaking, how would you expect anyone to read this and understand straight away what's going on? I mean, not many people would. Even lawyers would have difficulty with this. And also, from a point of view of just information, we're not able to deal with that much information in one go. So we'd start reading the sentence. By the time we get to the middle, we forget what's at the beginning. By the time we get to the end, we forget what's in the middle. And then we don't know what the link is between the beginning, the middle, and the end. And we have to reread and reread. And then we mentally have to go through that process of breaking the sentence down in any case. So there's lots of reasons why we shouldn't use long sentences, or we should try to keep long sentences to an absolute minimum. And another caveat, I'm not saying, as I explained in the video, I'm not saying don't use long sentences. Sometimes you have to use long sentences. There's just no other way. But try to keep to that rule of 1 point per sentence, or 1 point per clause, 2 clauses per sentence. And even if you write a sentence which is 40 or 50 words long, but you follow those principles, that long sentence is easy to understand. Okay, so that's the first sentence, or the first question. So let's have a look at the second one. The lessor or its authorised agent shall, after giving due notice to the lessee, have the right to enter the premises in the presence of the lessee or its representative at any reasonable hour, to examine the same or make repairs therein, or for the operation and maintenance of the building, or to exhibit the leased premises to prospective lessee, or for any other lawful purposes which it may deem necessary. So 72 words in this one. 72 words. So the sentence is too long. Readability score is off the scale, absolutely terrible. So how would I break down this sentence? Well, here, this sentence is a great way, is a great sentence to remember the basic rule that I always try to teach, or always ask the lawyers that I work with. And that basic question is, what are you trying to say? What's the basic main message? What's the basic main message? And if you break down this text, the basic main message is the message that you can give in the first sentence, and that is, the lessor or its authorized agent have the right to enter the premises in the lessee's or representative presence at any reasonable hour. That's the basic idea. And it fits in one sentence. And it fits in one sentence with 24 words ish. Now, I'll explain why I said ish in just a second. But once again, as you can see here with shall, I've crossed through it because, as I said in the first sentence, shall is not a word you should use in legal English because of the problems with how it's interpreted. So, and of course how it might be misinterpreted. So you might write shall meaning one thing, someone else might understand shall meaning a different thing, but we'll go through that in a later lesson and in later webinars. So that's the basic main message, but we've got a small issue. I've missed out one important piece of information, and that important piece of information is this bit here. What to do with after giving due notice to the lessee. It's kind of an extra clause. And that extra clause, if you have a look at the original sentence, it's rather unhelpfully put in the middle of the first sentence. So the lessor or unauthorized agent shall, after giving due notice to the lessee, have the right to enter the premises. So this clause in the original sentence kind of gets in the way of the main message. So if you've got a clause which gets in the way of the main message, well, what do you do with it? This clause is too small to create its own sentence. So it's got to go somewhere. It can't be put in its own sentence. So we've either got to put it at the beginning. So after giving due notice to the lessee, the lessor or its authorized agent, blah, 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 blah. Or it could go at the end. So its representative's presence at any reasonable hour after giving due notice to the lessee. So either at the beginning or at the end. Now, this decision is also something that we've got to think about carefully, because there's another issue that we have to think about, which is based on emphasis and where language should be placed for you to emphasize that language. You can see how lots and lots of writing errors, lots and lots of writing issues are all interlinked. Once you start correcting one or two, then you start making huge improvements, because all of these writing errors are interlinked. Now, you've got the idea of emphasis. Some people say the most emphatic point of the sentence is at the beginning of the sentence. Some people say the most important part of the sentence as regard emphasis is the end of the sentence. So even though I've got my main message, as you can see there, about a lessor or its authorization shall have the right to enter the premises in the lessee's representative present at any reasonable hour, I could even make more changes to that sentence to emphasize certain points of that sentence by putting it either at the beginning or at the end. Now, what I've done in my example is I've done something which is called front loading, and that's where you put everything at the front of the sentence. So so you can see the the subjects, the lessor and its authorized agent. Then we've got our verb structure, shall have the right to enter the premises. And then you've got the object in the lessee's or representatives in the lessee's or representatives' presence. Have we got that right? It sounds a little bit strange. Enter the premises. Yes, enter the premises. And then you've got the indirect objects in the lessee's or its representatives' presence at any reasonable hour. So I've put the important information at the beginning of the sentence, but someone might decide from the point of view of emphasis to put that bit at the end. I'm kind of going a little bit off on the tangent here, but just needless to say, lots of things are interlinked when it comes to writing well and writing effectively, and emphasis is one of those things that we'll have a look at in the future. So that's our first sentence. But then after that, what do we do with the rest of the information? Now, one thing that you can very often do with long sentences, and indeed one thing that long sentences very often are, is they're basically just a list. And if it's a list, then we have a solution for lists. And that solution is not to put everything in one sentence, because then it's really difficult to identify each point you're trying to make. It's easy to forget the main points, and you might focus on one point but not on the other. And there are many other problems with making a list hard to identify. And this touches on another problem of legal writing, which is called tabulation. And this is something that we have a look at in yet another video. So you can see how everything really is mixed together. So what do we do with the rest of the information? We put it in the list. We tabulate. So we've got to examine the premises, to make repairs therein, for the operation and maintenance of the building, to exhibit the leased premises to prospective lessee, or for any other lawful purposes which the lessor may deem necessary. So we've broken, and of course each point is treated as if it's its own sentence. So you can see here that we've got points from 3 words all the way up to 12 words, so that these are easily understandable and easily digestible points. You read this once, you know what's going on, and more importantly, you can find the information easily as well because of the tabulation. So when we have a look at the average of the redrafted sentence and list, we can see that we've got 10 words per sentence. So Going back to the readability age of the United Kingdom, this is pretty close to 9, so it should be understandable by absolutely everyone. And that's what we're trying to get at when we're writing. We're not trying to show off our skills. We're not trying to impress the person who's reading. We're trying to communicate a message and make sure that that message is understood by the person who's reading that message, and not only understood by the person who's reading the message, understood in the way that you want to communicate that message. I can tell you now, if you write Shakespearean English, the reader will not be impressed by the fact they can't understand what it is that you're trying to say. So try to keep it legal, try to keep it professional, try to keep it businesslike, try to keep it formal, and keeping your sentences short is part of all of those 4 things. Okay, thank you very much for watching the video today. If you've got any comments at all, or if you've got any questions, or indeed if you disagree with anything that I've said, then please write to me either in the comments below, or send me an email, or contact me on Facebook. And I'm more than happy to explain my thinking, or to listen to your arguments and have a discussion with you about what you think. And because that's really what I'm trying to do here. And this is the whole point of all of the things that I'm doing, is to, first of all, highlight the fact that legal writing is unfortunately open to interpretation, which is one of the reasons why I say there's, in all of the exercises that I do, that there are no right answers. Because how do we know what the right answer is? We can't contact the author, so we can only, given the context that we're presented with, we can only have a reasonable guess. But what the author actually meant, who knows? So there aren't any correct answers, but there are rules, and the rules help us write legal English, business English, general English, any form of academic English, in a way which achieves the goal of writing. In other words, accurate communication to someone else. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Friday nights, and I'll see you next week with another webinar.